Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers, and welcome to this Development Control Committee meeting of the 17th of June. Some housekeeping first. Fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room, so you go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and it's working. Thank you. And please can all members of the public switch their phones off or turn to silent. All right. For the benefit of the members of the public attending, I would like to explain who everybody is round this table. My name is Councillor Donald Sherlock, and I'm the chairman of the committee. Down the sides of the table to the left and right are the councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decision on the applications this evening. Immediately to my right and left are the officers who will be advising the councillors. In addition, I'd like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be looking at the evidence brought before us tonight and will make a decision based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning guidance and policy. I understand that planning can be emotive, and I ask that everyone remain polite and professional throughout the evening. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning is finished. And may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and ask members to keep any comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. Thank you. Now we move to the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have apologies in the form of Councillor Bound, and on substitutions, Councillor Miller is substituting for Councillor Mrs. Tucker. We also need to appoint a vice chair. Do I have any proposals? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose Councillor David Leakes as your vice chair.
Seconded.
Seconded. Thank you. Everybody in agreement? Thank you. Right, David. And may I also welcome the 2 new members to the committee, Councillor Westbrook and Councillor Bowyer. Declarations of interest? Any declarations of interest? No, we'll move on. I have no urgent matters. And the next item is minutes of the committee meeting on the 20th of May. Do I have your permission, members, to sign these? Read, thank you. So we move on to item number 5, which is applications for planning permission and public participation. Before we do, it will be introduced by Robert Sims, and I've got guest speakers in the form of Councillor. Wait a minute, where am I? Thank you. For the officer presenting is Robert Sims, Parish Council Maggie Leon, in support James George, and the Ward Councillor, Councillor Isaac, will speak too. Before I ask Robert Sims to do so, I just want to say to members, in our quest for innovation and at your request to improve the plans and things, we are trying out a PowerPoint presentation tonight. There is one minor point of clarification to the agenda paper plans, which Rob will point out, but we're trying this and see how it goes. Okay, Rob, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So we just turn to the point of clarification first of all. That's just the site plan which is shown in your agenda papers. The property is labelled as the Old Forge, and actually it's called Forge House. Old Forge Cottage is located to the northwest of the site, as you can see, so it's a neighbouring property. So we just move to the presentation now. Property's called the Forge House, Old Oxgrove, Berkeley. Proposals for the erection of an attached garage, which is an amended scheme to that approved under plan application BDB 74363, and proposals to include an increase in roof pitch, addition of a front dormer, and increase in the width to enclose an internal staircase. The application is recommended for approval as set out on the first page of this item. And there is just one update, which was a additional neighbour comment received, and the response to those comments is on the update paper in front of you. So presentation, we have the front elevation on the screen now, which shows the garage extension, the subject of this application, to the left-hand side with the dormer window in the roof space there. Onto the next slide, we've got a view from the access track, the access junction with Oxgrove. So it's a shared access of the site with Fulford Shard, and as you can see, the arrow points down to where the site is. You can just about see the top of the house there. Moving on down the street to the north by Milton Cottage is a view back towards the site, which is again pointed out by the arrow. Coming into the site, we've got a picture of the northwest boundary treatment with Old Forge Cottage to the left-hand side, and a bit more of a closer up down the side on the picture to your right. Moving round to the rear, so the rear elevation's on the left, just there with the little Velux in, you can see. And then you've got a photograph looking back at the side elevation, which shows a door at the first floor, which is to be enclosed, just to clarify. Moving on to some existing plans, if you like. So the original plans, which were taken before the previous application was approved. So you show the carport on the left-hand side of the front elevation there. And then moving on, you've just got some floor plans of that on the next slide. On the next slide on that, you've got the previously approved extension, which was approved under BDB 74363, which was approved in 2011. So you've got a garage extension to the left-hand side of the property there. And then subsequently the floor plans after that. And moving to the proposed elevations of what we are considering tonight. So you can see the increase in height, the dormer window, and the extension in width to the side. And just as to try and indicate where the previous approval was for the garage extension, there's a dotted outline on the next bit. There we are. To see that basically reflects the garage extension previously approved. So it's the increase in height, increase in width, and a dormer window that has been considered tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Right, now the first person to speak, please, is Maggie Leon from the Parish Council. You will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice toward the end, and you press the big black, the long black bar.
Hello, my name's Maggie North, and I'm a parish councillor at Berkeley Parish Council. I'm here today to represent the unanimous objection to this application by the Berkeley Parish Council, and also to represent the concerns raised by the three neighbours who strongly feel they are negatively affected by this build. Having been to the site on numerous occasions as it was being built, and as new retrospective applications were being submitted, I can say hand on heart that what should have been a small garage, which would have had minimal impact on the surrounding neighbours, has now escalated to become a much larger garage with the accommodation above. This accommodation above overlooks all the neighbours, all three neighbours, and is overbearing in relation to their homes. The building is now located less than a stone's throw from both Old Forge Cottage and Forge Cottage. Although the officer's report states that the number of trees located in Old Forge Cottage ensures there will be limited overlooking, this also means that the residents of Old Forge Cottage and Forge Cottage have no choice but to never cut down or trim the trees or hedges in order that they can ensure visibility into their homes and gardens remains limited and therefore maintains their privacy. In addition, the scale of the ridge height on the extension goes against the original pre-planning advice which was given by Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council for the garage. On these grounds alone, the application should be refused. In addition, we realise that this application has to be assessed on its merits. However, the naughty nature by which this application has happened is of great concern. The fact that the amended plans had to be submitted twice in order that what had been built was correctly shown, and this is still not reflecting what has been built. I believe the agent is currently once again applying for retrospective planning for the two other items which are not correctly featured on this application. We feel this is a mockery of the whole planning system, with an undoubted two-finger salute at it and those who do it correctly. We believe, if granted, this can only set a precedent for more of the same. Thank you. Sorry, I was very nervous.
Thank you, and I apologise for getting your name wrong. I've been given incorrect information. Members, any questions to Mrs. North? No? Thank you very much, Mrs. North. Next, please, can I have James George in support? Mr. North, you have 4 minutes. I'll give you a minute's notice towards the end, and you press the long bar on the...
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name's James George. I am a local tree surgeon in Berkeley, and I'm also Penny Ferguson's oldest son. Okay, is that better? Yeah. She's asked me to come and represent her this evening. As I mentioned before, I'm her oldest child. She has 6. She has a big family. And when she applied for the original garage and started to go ahead with the building, she thought possibly, with hindsight, she would have applied for permission, but because of a cost implication, her and the builder discussed putting a dormer annex purely for family reasons only. She has a brother who's quite poorly at the moment and would possibly like to come and stay here for periods of time. She didn't, as she gets on well generally with the neighbours, she had spoken to them about various issues, I gather, and there seemed to be a few minor suggestions, but the general consensus was that the neighbours were happy. The bedroom itself, the window faces to the front of the house, and literally you wouldn't be able to see any of the neighbours from that front window. There are considerable trees on the left-hand side, me being a tree surgeon notice them particularly, but my mum has said if they wanted to prune the trees, she would be quite happy to grow some form of vegetation higher up to make sure that there is no way that people can feel that their privacy was being invaded. She did this with the gesture of really providing some extra support for herself, for the family. She has 7 or 8 grandchildren, and she just wanted somewhere for them to stay when they come and visit. My sister Lucy lives in Scotland, my other sister Emma lives in Newmarket, and my brother Mark, who has 5 kids, they all live considerably distance away as well. The aim was purely to just make it a really nice family house. I'm sure if she was here instead of me, she would be saying that the intention was to keep everybody happy, and I think she's somewhat surprised at the backlash she's facing when verbally she's spoken to the people concerned and until recently has had no complaints. I don't understand the exact ins and outs of the planning application because I'm a tree surgeon, but from where I look at it, it makes the building look lovely. It doesn't seem to make any difference. There's a tiny change, possibly, but there's no way that we can see any difference from where the house was before over the neighbours, and we have no intention, or my mother does, of looking or spying on the neighbours anyway. With hindsight, she possibly should have done it differently, but the builder said if you stop now, apply for planning permission and then start again, it's going to cost you a huge sum because we're going to have to clear off site and then come back. And Penny, my mum, has been saving up for this extension for a very long time.
1 minute to go.
She intends living in this house with her 5 dogs for the rest of her life, and I feel that any application that she has made has been for all the right reasons. As I said, I'm a tree surgeon, I'm not a planning expert, but in my view, it makes the house look lovely and is an addition to the area. The people who live at Fulford Shard have been round to the house and say it looks fine, they love it. Caroline, one of the people who's supposedly complaining, has been round with my mum to the house recently and says she's got no objections. The people, Mr. Johnson, who I believe is complaining, is living in rented accommodation, and he's also said to my mum verbally that he's been quite happy. So that's all I can say, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Just wait a minute, Mr. George. Members, have you any questions? Councillor Goodison.
Yeah, like this one? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really quite surprised. You seem to suggest that your mother and the builder have discussed the fact that you know that it would be advantageous for them, and I can understand that, to put this dormer window in. I find it difficult to believe that a builder would not be aware of the fact that that would require planning permission. I mean, I presume, is this man a reputable builder?
As far as I'm concerned, yes, he comes. My mum had 4 or 5 quotes for the building work. She checked up all the references, and he came as the most likely to do the work to her very high standards within budget. Whether or not he has professional, I don't know, but my mum is not the sort of person who would employ anybody without doing references first.
I'm not sure that it's terribly relevant to this.
Supplementary,
Well, on the same...
Okay, fine, I'll
Yeah. Any others? No, right. Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. George. Councillor Isaac. You have 4 minutes, Councillor, with 1 minute's notice at the end.
Good evening, councillors. I'm speaking to the committee tonight in response to the formal concerns raised by 3 families, residents of my ward, who are living next to Forge House, and also from Burclad Parish Council. As a rule, I do not seek to intervene in neighbours' planning disputes, but I believe this is an exceptional and serious case. I was invited by the residents to each of their properties to see the impact of the substantially now built extension for which planning permission retrospectively is being applied. The extension as built is clearly of such a size and so close to the boundaries of the 3 neighbours' gardens so as to be highly intrusive on their lives. It is now 6.05 metres high and only 1 metre, 3 feet in my old language, from the boundary of Old Forge Cottage and 1.5 metres from Forge Cottage. This results in a significant loss of privacy and completely changes the outlook from their homes and gardens. For these substantive reasons, I do not agree with officers' recommended reasons for approval, numbers 1 and 4. The extension certainly does not relate sympathetically to the surrounding development. While the principle of a modest garage extension has been approved for planning previously, what this committee is now being asked to approve retrospectively is an entirely different extension in width and height, which now provides living accommodation above the garage and includes a dormer window, roof lights and a first floor door which looks directly out over the neighbours' gardens and into their living accommodation. In this context, it's worth highlighting that the site is outside of any recognised settlement policy boundary and is therefore within an area designated as countryside. I was contacted late on by residents and had not visited the site in time to request a site application by this committee. It may be that a site visit would be of assistance to councillors in that photographs can only go so far in capturing the impact on the ground, and you may in these circumstances wish to defer a final decision, but that is for you to decide. Certainly there were no photographs shown tonight which were taken from the perspective of the neighbours. And that's unfortunate, I think. The neighbours have been put in an entirely unacceptable position as they've watched the extension being built what has been built is materially different to what was granted consent, and worse, revised drawings supplied were subsequently found by officers to be seriously inaccurate. Neighbours can understandably have little confidence, even now, about what will be finally built in relation to the internal staircase. It will certainly bring the building line closer still. And there is a further retrospective planning application in the wings
1 minute.
to seek permission for an as-built rear courtyard, previously open-sided. Planning law may require that retrospective applications should be assessed on their merits, though it is hard to know in this case where a planning consent will correspond at any point with what is actually being built. It certainly sets an awful precedent for planning control in this borough, but the key issue, I submit, is the impact on neighbours who are seeking this committee's protection. Without it, it is understandable that residents may conclude that we prefer to take the line of least resistance in planning terms and accept what has been done.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Councillor Isaac? Councillor Potter.
Hello, Councillor Isaac. Obviously, as you know, as you said, we haven't had the benefit of a site visit, so obviously I'm looking at what we've got in front of us and also your commentary. Can I just check a couple of things with you regarding the impact on neighbours? We are talking about how close this property, which is the subject of the application, is to the boundary lines of those properties, not the buildings themselves, i.e. their own dwellings, which is, I can see from the plan, is some way away. Obviously, there's some separate. And in terms of what we're looking at, John, I mean, in terms of loss of privacy, I mean, we're obliged to look at such things as overlooking. And as far as I can detect and from what I've heard, I mean, there's a dormer window to the front of the garage in question where this annex is, which doesn't overlook the properties you're talking about. I wonder if I could just check that, double check that with you. As far as overshadowing is concerned, I mean, I'd be interested to hear your comments on that. What would that actually shadow? Would that shadow the garden area? Presumably that's what is meant by that. And in terms of overbearing, that's a subjective bit, isn't it, really? So I just wonder if you could help me in some detail about what your summary of those is and what your, what your view of those things are.
Yeah, to respond to the various points you made there, Councillor Potter, I think it's also a case of the scale of the development and the impact that has on the gardens and the house. The dormer window, it may be that there is an angled view from the dormer window into one of the properties. I think there's the issue now of the staircase, and it's not clear exactly how that's going to be dealt with, but that is at first floor and looking directly into the gardens of the neighbours. But I think actually that this extension has grown and it is now very close to the boundary of these three houses, and they're all in a sort of arc around this extension.
Any more? Thank you, Councillor. Right, members, questions to officers. Councillor Tomlin, followed by Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a question on page 7 of 9. At the top it talks about parking. It has been stated that this is going to be a studio space, I think, and as such is therefore not a bedroom, therefore it doesn't need parking. So if you could help me, condition 3 it's not clear to me, is that the word ancillary to the occupation? Is that saying not to be a bedroom? Because if this became a bedroom, would we know about it, and therefore would there be enough car parking on the site? I mean, how are we conditioning it enough, given our statement with parking? Really, that's the question.
Yeah, but I think the answer is twofold, isn't it? About whether there's enough parking spaces, and so first of all, just address that. So we always thought it was going to be a studio accommodation. It wasn't ever identified as a bedroom. We're hearing tonight that it is a bedroom, but that wouldn't affect car parking spaces because for a four-bed property here, you would need 3 parking spaces, and there's 2 in the garage, and there's plenty of space in front, so it would meet the parking spaces there. With regards to whether it affects the condition, with a term ancillary accommodation, that does mean that you can, a bedroom is ancillary accommodations, provided it's not rented out for a separate purpose, then it would remain as ancillary accommodation, and then that room, if you like, is captured by that condition to make sure it's not sold off or rented separately.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. You got me thinking there. If you go away on holiday and you rent a studio, you're going to sleep in it. That's the problem. If you describe this as studio accommodation, I would expect somebody to be able to sleep in it. I don't know what your interpretation of studio is. Define studio accommodation. That's the first question.
Chair, hopefully I can help. In terms of I think the reference to studio is simply a reflection of how it is described on the plans as submitted. So it's described as a studio above the garage. The reason why condition 3 was put on was effectively to ensure that it remained as some form of ancillary accommodation to the main house, i.e. if it's being described as a studio, the condition is just to make sure it doesn't become, as it says, a trade, business or professional studio of any sort. As it turns out, if it is being used as ancillary to the main house, then it could be used for any purpose ancillary to the main house, whether that be an extra bedroom, someone's studio, for example, if they're using it for an art studio for their own enjoyment, etc. So that was the purpose, but it's simply responding to the plans as submitted.
Thank you. The next thing, not once in here did I see the word retrospective. Maybe I glossed over it, and it wasn't until I happened to be talking to another couple of members of this committee, because I was subbing onto it, and what I've heard today, that it's probably been thrice retrospective. And I'm very surprised that that wasn't made clear right up front in the report. Yeah, that's my point, is, you have to go buried in the report. It's a retrospective application. And there's a previous history, and thank you for displaying the previous history on the screen, but retrospective 3 times, and then all we see at the start is, it looks like, and I've been in DC a fair bit, an ordinary application. Retrospective makes us think, what's the history of making it retrospective? And I'm very disturbed with what I've heard so far tonight. Various things we've heard tonight are not relevant. I'm very aware of that. But this goes back, my question is, that's the first application that came in here was granted on 2011, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, 2011, yeah.
And that was for just a garage?
Sorry. That was for an attached garage, attached double garage. It was also for a rear balcony as well, and a covered courtyard.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Councillor Bowyer.
Thank you, Chairman. I find it quite interesting that the gentleman said that his mother had met with various builders and this had come in on budget. Well, what we were originally granted planning permission was just a garage with a balcony round it, like the officers said, and this has grown and grown and grown like Topsy, and we're still not sure what's happening to the staircase. And I just think this has all been very speculative and almost like, as people were saying, that, well, it's up now and it'll go through as retrospective. I'm not happy about this at all. I think it's been an abortion from day one.
Question. I'm after questions,
Sorry.
Not debate. Do you have any more questions? Then.
So, Jim, just in terms of hopefully again assisting the committee in terms of the staircase. So on the photographs that were shown in the presentation at the beginning, there was a doorway that Rob alluded to in the first floor. Effectively, my understanding is that the build has got to a certain point where that door at the moment is exposed, because that, and if we can just go back to that photograph there, you see so the ladder leading up to what is a door, which at the moment is external. If we can go back to the proposed plans now, you'll see on the, so if you take the middle, top middle plan, we have the dormer window on the front. You'll see that there's a slight side projection now being proposed. That's not been built yet, but if this application was approved, that side projection would effectively enclose it, so that the staircase would be internal leading up to that door as built, with no further opening on that side elevation, effectively facing towards the old forge cottage. Does that assist at all?
Councillor Bowyer.
Thank you, Chairman. Does that mean then, if that was built, it would be even nearer to the boundary than the planned development is now?
So the details referenced in the report have reflected what's being proposed on those plans, as opposed to what's on the ground at the moment. So it reflects the fullness of those plans.
Any other questions? Can we move to debate then? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we're all well aware of the fact that it's already built and is retrospective is not relevant. I mean, what we're being asked to do today is to look at these plans and decide whether we feel they're reasonable and we wish to approve them. The fact that it has already been built, of course, is really quite advantageous to us, because it would allow us, and I would suggest that, you know, that we defer this and go for a viewing. We then will have an opportunity of looking at it and deciding whether all the sort of objections that people might have raised and would have raised are actually reasonable, because the thing is there in front of us. So my personal inclination would be that this merits being deferred, and for us to go and have a viewing of it. I'm somewhat reluctant to consider approving it on the basis of what we've been told so far. I would like to actually go and see it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any more comments? Councillor Potter.
I mean, if there's a developing consensus that talks about the advantages of a viewing, then I mean, I would go with that. Obviously, it's sometimes beneficial to us. We know that, and in fact, it's part of our process. I mean, subjectively, let me put it on the line. I mean, in many ways, I think in terms of the front elevation and the pitched roof of the dormer, I prefer that to what we had before, if I'm really truthful with you. If I'm looking at it subjectively and architecturally, I have to say that. The only concerns, I think, and annoying though it is to all of us, and I despair on occasions about some of the comments we hear from applicants about why things are done and then a planning approval is sought afterwards, but that isn't before us, obviously, and we're absolutely not going to take that into consideration. The areas that, in terms of loss of privacy to the neighbours, I mean, those are areas that concern me, of course they are. To be frank, from what I've got in front of me this evening, I wouldn't think that those are issues that would stop me certainly saying that this application should be approved. I'll be very clear about that. But if there's benefit that will come from a viewing that, you know, might let us see that rather clearer than we're seeing tonight, and that's the view of the committee, then let it be. But as far as I'm concerned, Chair, I have to say to you, I would have supported the officers' proposals tonight and said that this should be approved.
Councillor Miller.
Before I pass comment on what's just been said, what concerns me is not the application we've got in front of us, but the process of how we got here. Now, I think that's valid, is that the planning permission was approved for an extension to the house. What happened to building control? If building control didn't visit this site, they would have seen straight away that something else had been put in place in contravention of planning permission. If it goes the other way, if something's wrong, building control say stop, come back, check if I'm right, because they did it to some of the approved improvements I made to my own house. They would say stop, check it again, but it didn't seem to happen in this particular case. That's why I asked the question about the 2011. That's 4 years ago. And this is proceeded at the whim, and I'm sorry I'll use that expression, of either the agent or the householder to just carry on as they wished. It doesn't give me a lot of confidence if at the end of the day approval is given by this committee for this application, that anybody would stick to it. That's what concerns me. And the comments made by the ward councillor and by the parish council that this is riding roughshod over the planning system, I have to concur with. We have a process. The process, as you well know, Mike, is there for a reason. If we lose control of that process and we're then given another retrospective application on anything, doesn't matter what it is, I'm very nervous about how this whole process is being handled. There have obviously got to be checks and balances on this, but there are some very sensitive areas, conservation areas come to mind, where there is strict planning permission given. And if it's given, it's done within strict parameters. This is an example where it's eating away at the whole process, and that gives me a great concern. I would have actually moved a deferment on this, so I fully support Councillor Goodison and Councillor Potter, that I think we'd get a lot more confidence if we had a viewing of this particular property and relate it to the application in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm following on really from what Councillor Potter said. My reading of it on the privacy aspect is that it says in the paper on page 6 of 9 that the nearest property, Forge Cottage, is located 14 metres to the north of the extension, which obviously is sufficient distance not to result in any visual intrusion or overbearing impact on the neighbouring property. Also, reading through the reports, I noticed that one of the conditions that's been added is obscure glass to the dormer window, I believe. And in addition, no openings below 1.7 metres. So I'm taking that in, as it is on the plan, what we've actually seen. I can't see anything here that would make me not approve it. But on the other hand, if members are in agreement that they'd like to go and view that, I'm quite happy to go along with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of one point, just to clarify the process and the control, if you like, that the council still has over this entire position. Building control will certainly look at the way in which the extension is being built. If they do identify that there's a contradiction between the plans that they have been given under building regulations with anything in the office in terms of planning approval, then that is one method by which we are notified, if you like, to look at planning enforcement. In this instance, as with all retrospective applications, the key issue is effectively if you were given this planning application on the basis of it not being built yet, would you have approved it or not? If the committee at some point decided to refuse this application or any other retrospective application for that matter, the council still maintains control, if you like, on the basis that enforcement action could then be pursued. In this instance, the way in which the process happened, if you like, was that, as I understand it, the applicant started to build out the 2011 permission, which is obviously valid for three years, and then at some point the bill deviated to a different design, at which point the issue of the discrepancy between the plans was brought to their attention, and hence the application was then submitted. I think following the case officer's site visit, it was then found that there were further discrepancies between what was being built, hence the second set of amended plans coming in as well. So that's the kind of process that it followed, but ultimately the council still maintains control if they find fault with the application in its current form when considered against the policies of the development plan.
Thank you. So what you're saying is that from the point of view of us tonight, we take these plans and not the previous ones. Exactly. Right. Thank you. Any more questions, members? or debate. I have a proposal and a seconder to defer this. Shall we vote for approval on that, please? Those in favour? It's deferred. That motion is carried and the thing will be deferred. Rob, would you like to wrap that up? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to summarise, the application is deferred for the site visit, which will be for next month's committee, which will be the 15th of July, so site visits on the Friday before that. Thanks.
Good, thank you. Well, there are no further items to discuss, members, so at 7:10, I close the meeting.